I know I need a haircut. On the other hand, some people say I look like Piqué, the sweeper of Barcelona, because it sticks out. It's a beautiful day here. It's early morning. It's March 5th. That's when I'm making this video. Very nice weather. We have windy during the day, but these very nice Honduras, since we're up in the mountains, we have these very nice cool mornings. So it's great mornings for latte and peanut butter sandwiches, but that's me. Okay, so I'm going to dive into chapter 3, the essence of marriage, and I'll do two sections, love and the piece of paper, and then I will read the overly subjective view of love. And I'll try to read straight through, limited commentary. So we're working with Ephesians chapter 5, verses 31, and Genesis chapter 2, 24. For this reason a man shall leave his father and his mother, and be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This New International Version. So I remember some years ago watching a television drama in which a man and a woman who were living together were having an argument over whether they should get married. He wanted to go ahead and do it, but she did not. And at one point she blew up and said, "Why do we need a piece of paper in order to love one another? And I don't need a piece of paper to love you. It only complicates things." Here's someone who lacks wisdom. That'll save you 40 years of good study. Take the easy way out. That statement stuck with me because as a pastor in New York City, I've heard essentially the same thing from younger adults for years. When the woman said, "I don't need a piece of paper to love you," she was using a very specific definition of love. She was assuming that love is, in its essence, a particular kind of feeling. She was saying, well, I feel romantic passion for you, and the piece of paper doesn't enhance that at all. And actually, it may hurt. She was measuring love mainly by how emotionally desirous she was for his affection. And she was right that the marital, legal, the piece of paper would do little or nothing directly to add to the feeling. But you guys see, marriage is much more than a feeling, and often fleeting feelings. But when the Bible speaks of love, it measures it primarily not by how much you want to receive, but how much you are willing to give of yourself to someone. Remember the word selflessness. How much are you willing to lose for the sake of this person? And now we start thinking of things like sacrifice. How much of your freedom are you willing to forsake? How much of your precious time, emotion, and resources are you willing to invest in this person? Okay, this is a greater love. And for that, the marriage vow is not just helpful, but it is even a test. In so many cases, when one person says to another, "I love you, but, let's not ruin it by getting married," what that person really means is, "I don't love you enough to close off all of my other options. I don't love you enough to give myself to you that thoroughly." To say, "I don't need a piece of paper to love you," is basically to say, my love for you has not reached the marriage level yet. This is very true. Nobody wants to hear this, but it's true. One of the most widely held beliefs in our culture today is that romantic love is all important in order to have a full life, but that it almost never lasts. A second related belief is that marriage should be based on romantic love. Now, why is this? Because everyone's been brainwashed by these terrible, horrible Hollywood movies. So we have all of this idea. Everything has to be just non-stop 24/7 romance. and let's go to Vegas and gamble. No. Let's get a drink. Leaving Las Vegas. No, it's not about this. Taken together, these convictions lead to the conclusion that marriage and romance are essentially incompatible. That it is cruel to commit people to lifelong connection after the inevitable fading of romantic joy. Yeah, this is the teaching that sprung in the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, which is the endarkenment. The biblical understanding of love does not preclude deep emotion. As we will see, a marriage devoid of passion and emotional desire for one another doesn't fulfill the biblical vision. But neither does the Bible pit romantic love against the essence of love, which is sacrificial commitment to the good of the other. If we think of love primarily as emotional desire and not as active, committed service, we end up pitting duty and desire against each other in a way that is unrealistic and destructive. How these two fit together is the subject of this chapter. Biblical marriage is a lot about commitment, about keeping your word. On the other hand, it would be so foolish to say that biblical marriage is somehow devoid of romance. Probably the most beautiful book that's ever been written, the most romantic, is the Song of Solomon. I mean, just read the Song of Solomon if you think the Bible is somehow prude on this subject. Now I'm going to read the overly subjective view of love. The overly subjective view of love. This will be the last section. Modern people think of love in such subjective terms that if there is any duty involved, it is considered unhealthy. Over the years, I have often counseled with people who are quite locked into this conviction. This is particularly true when it comes to sex. Many people believe that if you have sex with your spouse just to please him or her, though you are not interested in sex yourself, it would be inauthentic or even oppressive. This is the thoroughly subjective understanding of love as passionate feeling. And often this quickly leads into a vicious cycle. If you won't make love unless you are in a romantic mood, at the very same time as your spouse, then sex will not happen that often. This can dampen and quench your partner's interest in sex, which means there will be even fewer opportunities. Therefore, if you never have sex unless there is great mutual passion, there will be fewer and fewer times of mutual passion. Put the children to bed. One of the reasons we believe in our culture that sex should always and only be the result of great passion is that so many people today have learned how to have sex outside of marriage. Fornication. And this is a very different experience than having sex inside it. Outside of marriage, sex is accompanied by a desire to impress or entice someone. It is something like the thrill of the hunt. When you are seeking to draw in someone, you don't know. It injects risk, uncertainty, and pressure to the lovemaking that quickens the heartbeat and stirs the emotion. If great sex is defined in this way, then marriage, or the piece of paper, will indeed stifle that particular kind of thrill. But this defines sexual sizzle in terms that would be impossible to maintain in any case. The fact is that the thrill of the hunt is not the only kind of thrill or passion available. Nor is it the best. I mean, you have to ask yourself your question, like, what do you want? Like one great one-night stand? Or do you want like 40 years of committed, deep marriage where you're sacrificing to one another? I mean, these two cannot be compared. And then Tim Keller talks about his wife, an incident, Kathy. Kathy and I were virgins when we married. Even in our day, that may have been the minority experience, but that meant that on our wedding night, we were not in any position to try to impress or entice one another. All we were trying to do was to tenderly express with our bodies the oneness we had first begun feeling as friends, and which had then grown stronger and deeper as we fell in love. Frankly, that night I was clumsy and awkward and fell asleep and anxious and discouraged. Sex was frustrating at first. It was the frustration of an artist who has in his head a picture or a story but lacks the skills to express it. However, we had, fortunately, not learned to use sex to impress, nor to mix the thrill of the dangerous and the forbidden with sexual stimulation and mistake it for love. He should have watched Legends of the Fall. Brad Pitt at his prime. With sex, we were trying to be vulnerable to each other, to give each other the gift of bare-faced rejoicing in one another, and to know the pleasure of giving one another pleasure. And as the weeks went by, and then the years, we did it better and better. Yes, it means making love sometimes when one or even both are not in the mood. But sex in a marriage done to give joy rather than to impress can change your mood on the spot. The best sex makes you want to weep tears of joy, not bask in the glow of a good performance. One, again, is giving and selflessness. The other is egoist. A vos no importa porque egoísta. All right, good. Glad you enjoyed.